Please join me in welcoming Vijay Gupta.
It's such a joy to be here. This poem is called When the Violin, which is fitting for this moment. And it's going to be followed by music written by the LA-based composer Rina Esmail. So the poem is this. When the violin can forgive the past, it starts singing. When the violin can stop worrying about the future, you will become such a drunk, laughing nuisance that God will then lean down and start combing you into her hair. When the violin can forgive every wound caused by others, the heart starts singing. Forgiveness is a radical act. And I would say that every act of creativity is also an act of forgiveness. It is the beginning of choosing a new song, literally a new story for ourselves. So often we are placed literally in the box of others' expectations. And the only way for us to pierce through those membranes is to forgive, which is the hardest effing thing to do. I'm an Indian kid whose last name is Gupta, so I should have been a doctor. When I started my undergraduate, my mother had already decided my major. It was going to be biology pre-med. And like any good son, I was doing my internships, my summer internships. And I was lucky enough to land an internship at the Harvard Institutes of Medicine, where I was studying the pathology of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease with a researcher named Dr. Dennis Selko, who was credited with discovering the amyloid beta plaque that builds up in the prefrontal cortex in Alzheimer's disease patients. But he introduced me to a researcher instead named Dr. Gottfried Schlaug, who was working at Brigham and Women's Hospital nearby in Boston. And he was studying the impact of music on the brain. And Dr. Schlaug's work is actually referenced in Oliver Sacks's brilliant book, Musicophilia. And at the time, Schlaug was working with stroke victims, people who had lost the ability to string along a coherent string of sentences. They had become aphasic due to an injury to what's called the Broca's area or Wernicke's area of their brain. But what he found is that if he encouraged his patients to sing a tune with the words, that they could actually then string along the word. They could actually enunciate those words if there was music involved. So what did he do? He gave his patients a dose, literally a prescription of music. He gave them 80 hours of singing lessons. And he did functional MRI, fMRI scans the whole way through. And after the dose of 80 hours of singing lessons, he found that his patients had literally rewired their brains. That the music had created a homologous, meaning an equal, speech center in the undamaged right hemisphere of the brain. Now, this research was groundbreaking at the time. This is 2003, 2004 that I was visiting Dr. Schlaug's lab. But at the time, as a teenager, aching for music, the thing I was actually curious about learning from Dr. Schlaug was not neuroscience, but I knew that he had been a trained professional musician. He was an organist, and he had trained at the Vienna Conservatory. And all I asked him at that time was, do you miss music? Do you miss playing? And he said to me, every day. And he said that if the violin is calling to you, you need to go play the violin now. The violin will not wait, but science might. And so I had my escape plan from my family. And I took a major leap, and I auditioned for one of the greatest orchestras in the country, which is our Los Angeles Philharmonic. And on my first try, it was like jumping off a chair and landing on the moon. I landed a job in the first violin section of the LA Philharmonic. A few months after joining the orchestra, my dad finally gave me the keys to our blue Camry and said, okay, drive us home. And of course, the minute I got in the car, I went too fast and I hit the accelerator too hard and he slapped my hand and I got really flustered and I kept driving, I kept making mistakes and I missed all the red light turns because you make left turns on red lights here in Los Angeles, right? And I ended up going a little bit further east and further south than I meant to. And downtown LA becomes Skid Row. And I see on either side of the street people living under tarps and tents, sleeping on the sidewalk, crossing in the middle of the road, pushing shopping carts, and talking to themselves. And it felt like someone had physically punched me in the gut, because all I felt at that moment was shame. I was a hypocrite. The world did not need another conservatory-trained musician sitting on stage at Walt Disney Concert Hall or the Hollywood Bowl. And I had just met a man named Nathaniel Anthony Ayers, who was the subject of a series of columns, later on a book and a movie called The Soloist. And Nathaniel was one of the first black men to ever study at the Juilliard School in Manhattan. Nathaniel, in his junior year, started having delusions related to paranoid schizophrenia. He started becoming very paranoid. At one point, he was in a lesson where he was practicing technique, and he actually stripped off all of his clothes because he felt that he had bugs crawling all over him. He had a shopping cart filled with instruments. He had a violin and a trumpet and a cello in there and a flute, and he used to play under a bird-shit-stained statue of Beethoven in Pershing Square. And so when I met Nathaniel and he asked me for a violin lesson, I had never talked to someone who had had his experience before. And so I just started playing for Nathaniel backstage at Disney Hall in one of our practice rooms. I just started playing for him. And after about half an hour of just playing music for him, he started to pick up his violin and he played with me. And after that experience, the question I asked myself was, how many more Nathaniels were out there? And so from that point, I went to the Maple Avenue Clinic in Skid Row, the Department of Mental Health Clinic. And so I went to this place, and we're playing this really dramatic, amazing string quartet by Beethoven. And it's a piece of music that is called Sturm und Drang, right, in Beethoven's style. It's violent music. It is supposed to grab the audiences. And so we start playing, and 30 seconds into the first movement of this quartet, a woman in the front row, like sitting so close to me, about 4 feet away from me, and I'm playing first violin, she shoots her hand into the air. Right? And it's like 6 inches from my face, and I recoil and I almost fall back because in classical music we haven't signed up for human contact. And so she keeps her hand up there the entire time that we're playing. And we finish the first movement, and I don't even have to call on her. She's like already bursting out of her seat, and she says, "How did you know? How did you know that that music is my story? Or how did you know that that music is my parents yelling at me, and that's me and my sister making up games together so that I could like make sure that she was safe when she went to sleep, and then when it became dramatic and she's just going and going, it's like this like Niagara of emotion coming at me, and I'm putting out like SOS signs to the social workers who are all in the back of the room, all crying. Because they told me later on that they had never heard her speak before. They actually said that we had opened up an emotional door and walked through that door because when she said what was going on in this person's life when they wrote this music, that was the time that Beethoven had written his suicide note. Beethoven at that time had written something called a Heiligenstadt Testament, where he confessed to his brothers Karl and Johann that he was being mean because he couldn't hear anything, and that he was considering taking his life. And from that point, Beethoven went on to write 120 more opuses of music, completely deaf. And he kept the Heiligenstadt Testament in his desk, like a memento mori, and looked at it every single day before he composed. One of the things I learned about making music in Skid Row for the last 16 years is that people don't become homeless when they run out of things or when they run out of money. People become homeless when they run out of relationships. And I invite every single one of you in this room and everyone watching to come join me. We need this. We need the relationship. I think so often we come in with the entitlement of thinking that we're the ones there to give. Right? If we actually change that perception box to realize that we might be also needing to go to Skid Row in order to fill that void within ourselves. Because the time that I felt the most terrified making music was when I was on stage at Disney Hall and the Hollywood Bowl. And then I would walk into a Skid Row shelter or a county jail. My arms wouldn't shake with nerves. And I would feel like I understood again why I had ever become a musician in the first place. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.